couple of years ago, I was learning about written narration, and to learn more about it, I read this book, Know and Tell, The Art of Narration by Karen Glass, and it completely changed our homeschool for the better. It has been such a blessing to us, and I have learned so much about writing, and it has allowed me to teach writing in such a different way than I ever thought I would. It's nothing like the writing that I grew up with in the school system or anything like I would have taught writing as a teacher. It's very different, and the process is one of those where you kind of have to trust it. And so it's now been 2 years that we've been following this philosophy, and I thought I'd give you an update on how that's going. When I first read this book, I did a little bit of a look through and had a video on here where I shared what is inside and what you're learning. Feel free to go back and watch that video. It might be very helpful to you, but just a quick preview of what this is. It's going to talk to you about narration, which is the art of telling back. So for example, if I said, oh, tell me about your vacation, you are narrating to me, okay? If we read a story and I say, tell me about the story, you are narrating it to me. This book is going to start with that oral narration at a young age, starting at about 6. And then it's going to work its way into written narration, starting at about ages 9 or 10. And these ages are flexible. And then it's going to get all the way into high school when you bring in composition. This book walks you through every process, every step of the way. There are such helpful charts in here that break down how you should teach it and when you should teach it. And so definitely go back to that video so you can see a look at those charts because they are so helpful. This is one of those books that you could read again and again and gain different knowledge each time you read it. I first read it when we started a couple years ago, and early this summer I picked it up again and was able to gain more confidence and just a plan for this upcoming year on how we want to keep going with this. Let me jump back to kind of where we started, and then I'll kind of work our way up to where we are now. A couple of years ago, probably 2.5, 3 years ago, my daughter was 8-ish, and we had tried some writing through the curriculum that we were using at the time. And it just really wasn't great. I never really liked writing growing up. I always felt like it was forced, and I feel like I just kind of blanked every time I had to come up with something, and it wasn't fun, in my opinion. And so I really dreaded doing writing assignments with my child. The few that we did, I just felt like it was frustrating. It almost felt like I was writing the paper and not her. I struggled to just be quiet and let her use her own voice because as an adult, like I know what sounds better. So I felt like I was just constantly correcting her. It's a flaw with me, but I just really wasn't a great writing teacher. So when I read this book, it was so eye-opening and really just like a completely different approach to writing that I thought, okay, this I can do. The very first written narration assignment I gave to her was a book that we read about the Vikings. And I told her, I was going to read this. I did exactly what the book said. Let them know what they're going to have to do so that they can pay attention and they know what to expect. And I did this. And I asked her to, after we read the book, I said, okay, I want you to go and write a couple of sentences about this book. And so she went, we had never done it before. She went into the room and time went by and it was just like total, she did not know what to do, just kind of staring at the paper. And then it got frustrating and then the tears came and just had no idea. And not, even just one sentence was hard to get out. And so I knew this was going to take time. And the reason I tell that story is because starting at the beginning, it's really rough, but the beauty of the growth is so worth the effort. So I helped her through those first couple of sentences. And then once it was done, it was like, okay, we can do this. And so we started practicing that with some of the books that we were reading for history. And at the start, it was just 1 or 2 sentences. I think I even remember I had a bribe. Like, if you could just write a sentence, I will let you do an art hub for kids, or whatever that's called, with a Viking. So, there were little ways to kind of motivate her to just get the words on the paper. Now, the thing that was so different from what we had done in the past was we don't correct it. And I think that's the part that kind of makes people go, what? But that is the whole point of written narration. It is to encourage fluency in writing, to encourage words on paper, and not to put a stop to thoughts. And that's what editing does. And so when she found out that she could write and then nobody was judging it after, it was almost like this weight off of her shoulders. And I can remember the first time that she wrote something and I said, can you read it to me? That's what she suggests in the book. And so she looked at me, because normally I'm reading it going, this should be capitalized, this should have a period, this is spelled wrong. And she looked at me and I said, go ahead and read it to me. And so she did. And I said, okay, great job. And she was just so taken aback, like, wait, what? We're not going to mess with this? And I told her, I said, no, from now on, we're just going to practice getting words on paper. And her eyes just lit up. And I'll never forget those little bitty moments that really just changed our attitude about writing for her and for me. So what's so funny is it took a couple of weeks to get the hang of it. But then suddenly she was like, you know what, Mom? I love writing. I just want a notebook. I just want to write in a notebook. And I'm thinking, what? Okay. So I bought, 25-cent notebooks and gave them to her. And she started just writing. She wrote about, I think we were reading the Harry Potter series at the time. So she was pretending that she was in a class, or she was writing some of the plants from herbology. It was all these different things that she was doing related to what we were reading, but just making up her own thing. And she would say, I want to read this to you. Okay. That's creative writing. I had purchased some type of creative writing program years before, and it was like pulling teeth trying to get her to do something creative. Now, suddenly she's doing it all on her own, and I'm not prompting her at all. She even had a journal that she titled Essays, because, Hermione writes all these essays, and she loved that. So how funny that we went from completely frustrated writer crying over 2 sentences to writing pretend essays. So creative writing became something that she was doing completely on her own. I was never having to assign her anything, and she was always coming up with something new. And even though it was kind of towards the same book, I didn't care because she was enjoying the process. We started doing regular written narration for our history books that we were reading. We did American History through picture books, where we worked through the timeline of history with just picture books. It was so much fun to be able to sit with my whole family and just read one beautiful picture book after the next while learning about history. And once a week, we took one of those books, and my oldest daughter wrote a narration about it. And it was such a great way to practice the process, because the books are just incredible. And it really had them listening intently and then writing well about the topic. And so we did that over the last couple of years, aiming to do about one a week. The one rule was we're never editing. And that was hard to do, but we did it. Eventually, we added in a quick self-check. So probably after a few months of doing it, I would start to say, will you check and make sure that your sentence starts with a capital letter and ends with a period or a question mark or whatever it needs? And so that was kind of just a prompt for her to do it on her own. And so even now to this day, I'll ask her, did you check for capital letters and periods? And she'll say, yeah. So that's kind of where we went. We started with once a week doing our history written narrations, and they were just so simple, you guys. I put them, and this is part of that history curriculum. I would print out these little pages for coloring, and then she would just write about it. So that was what we were doing once a week. Then after a while, I would probably say 9 months to a year, I added in a second written narration, and that had to do with what we were reading in language arts. So at first it started out with I was having her write about a chapter, and then eventually it was a book related to the novel. So it kind of changed over time, but for the last probably 6 months or so, I aim to do 2 written narrations a week. It doesn't always happen, but that's been a goal. So, I'm ready to be like gung-ho, let's get into writing. But I then picked up this book again this summer and reread it, and it's like, okay, no, it's a much slower process. So now it's kind of what's to come. I will tell you just a fun fact before I jump into that. To prove to you the process of what has happened over time, we started with 2 sentences with tears. And the coolest part about this is I have the evidence. I have the sentences that she wrote to start this whole process off. So here we have the 2 sentences here, okay? And when I first was doing this, I was actually doing it wrong. We did start editing at first before I kind of understood the process. And it's funny because you can look back at her writing, and I now look at the editing that we did, and I almost feel like, oh, that's so mean. Like, how could you do that to her? But it's true. I mean, we crossed out all this stuff. I mean, here's an example right here, trying to fix what she wrote. And it honestly just discourages the process. Every time she writes something, as I mentioned before, she knows that I'm just gonna, break it down and tell her to be better. So it's funny to see, if you go back to her writing, I can find in here where I said, you know what, we're not gonna edit this. We're just gonna let it go and practice getting words on paper. And it's almost like suddenly her writing got a little bit longer. It was like a breath of fresh air. She wasn't so hesitant to write things anymore because she knew that it didn't have to fit some certain mold. So that's been kind of the growth. The other thing I wanted to point out is I remember in one of our written narrations, as she was kind of growing in this process, she would always kind of go to another quiet room to do her writing. And she came back and she handed me the paper and she goes, I want you to read it. I kind of added my own little flair. And I just thought, look at that. Like, there was no instruction to add descriptive detail or make sure you add adjectives or make sure that, it has such and such theme. She used her own voice to describe what she had read in that history book. And, one of her things was like a smiley face in the middle of it. So that's not really grammar there, but it shows me that she found joy in what she was saying. And that is so important. So that's kind of just a little bit about her growth as she went on. The end of this last year, she told me that she was going to write a story. And we've done that, but she's done that before. Oh, I'm going to write a story. And, it ends up being just kind of writing, and it doesn't really come to an end. And so I challenged her. I said, I think this is fantastic. I want you to challenge yourself and set a goal to bring this story to an end. And so every few days, she was just so into it. She was just writing. And every few days I'd say, do you have a plan on where this is going? And oh yeah, she did. And I mean, we're talking 20 some pages of writing in a notebook. And to the point where I'm going, okay, this is not going to end. But eventually she did bring it to an end. So we went from 2 years ago, tears to get 2 sentences, to writing 20 plus pages in a notebook, a story of her own. And I went back and read it, and yes, there were grammatical errors. Yes, it needed to be edited, but that's not where we are. Right now, we are encouraging words on paper. And the fact that she can get 20 pages worth of words is so phenomenal to me. So that kind of ended last year for us. And now the question is, where do we go next? So as I did my research this summer, the goal is to, at this age, it's to develop fluency. You basically want your child to be able to do a written narration every day of the week that you're doing school. And so we were doing goal 2, right? Sometimes it was just 1, but we had a goal of 2. This year, I'm going to set a goal of 3 and really make it an effort to always get those 3. I have a goal to do a written narration for her language arts. We do ours based on novels, and I can link some information on how we do that. So she'll do one for that subject. She's going to do one for history, writing about the lessons that she's reading. And then I have a goal to choose one more in the week. And that one will probably vary depending on what we're reading. So I can easily get 3 a week. At the end of the semester, I'll see if I can maybe add a 4th to our week. But my goal is to get consistent written narration, at least 3, and then eventually working our way to 4 or 5. When we finish that, I'm going to give her a year at least. If we need another year to do that, I think that we would take it. The book suggests around 12, 13 to then take it a step further, and she's 11. However, it also says it's possible that it's 14 or 15 years old before you can take it a step further. So the cool thing about this is it's going to be different for every child, and you can really make it just for your individual child. And I'll talk more about that here in a second. So we have goals for this year. There's also talk about doing some creative narration. I feel like we're already there. You know, what she's writing about her stories, what she's writing about, when she asks for those journals. So that creative writing is there, and I don't think I need to add anything to that. So now the goal is just adding more into our week to build her fluency. It's to the point where if I tell her she has to do a written narration, she just knows and she just goes, right? And, she'll give me a page and a half of writing without a problem. So we still do not correct it. She's just writing. Okay. What I should do is come back in a year or 2 and tell you where I am now, but kind of looking to the future. Okay. That's probably risky, right? But the next step is to read this book. This is called On Writing Well, The Classic Guide to Writing Nonfiction by William Zinsser. And this book is the one that Karen Glass recommends that everyone should read. She said, if there's one book you should read about writing, this is it. My goal is to pre-read this before giving it to her so that I can better understand how I want to incorporate it. Just briefly skimming through it, the chapters are very short and engaging and easy to read. So this will hopefully be in our future. I'm not going to glue myself to anything, but thinking about this plan, this is what comes after the fluency. So we build the fluency, we bring in this book. I have my eye on a composition program to start her in probably either 8th or 9th grade. It's just going to depend on where we are with her fluency. And it is by simply Charlotte Mason, but it's written by Karen Glass, which is so exciting because it's going to follow her model. So eventually what you do is you practice editing the narrations that you write. And then that turns into composition. And so I believe that there's going to be 4 courses, and the first one is available. So that's exciting because hopefully more will be available by the time we're ready for it. But I'm never going to glue myself to this thing, but that's kind of where I see our future with writing. So technically, we will not have a formal writing curriculum until the 8th or 9th grade, which for some people is probably mind-blowing. But the point is, by the time we get there, she will be such a fluent writer that it doesn't become a frustrating process. The other day, her and I had a conversation, and she asked me if I liked writing when I was in school. And I told her that honestly, I didn't. And I said, I didn't think it was fun. I never knew what to write. And then when I did have to write, it was something that I didn't know much about. And, we'd have to write these certain papers. And she looked at me and she said, you couldn't just write about what you want? Like, it is just total news to her, right? Because for her, writing is a joyful, interest-led experience. And it never, ever would have been like that if it wasn't for this book. So I highly recommend this read. Even if you don't follow it exactly how it is, there's just so much you can learn from it. Okay, so now I kind of just want to talk about the rest of my family. 2 years ago, I started oral narration. My second child, she's 9 right now. So she was 7 when we started just the narration process, which starts with oral. My third daughter is 6, and she's been practicing narration off and on, not seriously, but she also is used to having to tell back something that we're reading. So I am building their oral narration skills. I have a goal to start written narration with my 9-year-old this year. And to be completely honest, even though I've done it before, it's a little bit daunting to me because she's a completely different student. She has different gifts and abilities than my other child, and I have no idea how it's going to go. She is kind of a frustrated writer when it comes to just even handwriting or copywork or just writing a sentence. And so I am really trying to just be patient, and I'm honestly thankful for this because I know that we can get there, and that we, instead of compounding her frustration, we can allow her to be a little more fluent and enjoy the process a little bit more. So that's one thing that we're going to start this year. And I promise you, my goal is write one sentence and we'll go from there. One thing I love about this book is that she does have a chapter in here for struggling students, how to help them, how to, different things that you can do to assist them as they need. She even talks about typing in here. So just tons of ideas. But then what I was going to say is she has examples in here that show a child who wrote their first narration and literally every single word is spelled wrong. Every single word. It's almost not readable, right? And then she shows another narration from this same child months later, right? And suddenly a few words are legible and it's a little bit longer. So I love these examples, these explicit examples in here, because it just really gives you a boost of confidence when I can look at it and say, oh wow, that's kind of, I think that's what my child, her writing is going to look like. Look what it can turn into. And just from this written narration practice. So I'm looking forward to challenging my second child, but I'm also really trying to just make sure and have patience and know that we are very early in the process. She recommends starting written narration around 9 or 10, but it could be later if needed. So we are definitely on the earlier side, but I do just want to attempt it and see where it goes from there. And if I feel like, okay, we're not ready, we're going to try again next year, then that's what I'm going to do. So I really love the flexibility of written narration. Okay, so yeah, that was a little bit about what it is, how it's going, and where we hope to go in the future. I always don't like to plan that far ahead. I'm almost like beating myself up, like, Jamie, you might not think the same in a couple of years, but I do think it's good to have a plan, you know, especially with such a immeasurable process. Like you're not grading anything, you're just listening and reading the writing and trusting the process. It really makes it difficult to understand where you're going. But now, 2 years into it, I can really see the benefits, and I'm just so passionate about it. So I try to incorporate narration and written narration whenever I can, because I know it's good writing practice. So yeah, we will not be using a formal writing curriculum this year. We will just continue our written narration through our subjects. We write across multiple subjects. And yeah, I'm just really looking forward to it, and I'm excited to start a new student in written narration and see where that goes. I'm especially excited to see the different gifts and the way they, you know, work for each of my children as they grow. It's such a privilege to be able to experience their unique gifts and help them grow. So yeah, if you have questions about written narration, you can write them in the comments. I'm not a pro. I'm gonna have to look it up probably, but I highly recommend this book. Even if you don't think you can do it, even if you think there's no way, I can't let go of editing, I can't do any of that. It's just a beautiful, confidence boosting book. I love it so much. I love the approach. So definitely check this out. Put it on hold at your library, or I'll link it below if you want to find it on Amazon. And then I'll link this one as well, but I have not read it, just so you know, but hopefully this will be in our future. Okay, can't wait to chat with y'all in the comments.